Hello, my name is Mary Fantazia. Today is the 4th of November 2019. This is Unit 2, Case Studies number 3 and 4. First, we'll go ahead and go over case study number 3, in which we are given a 5-year-old boy who was brought into an annual exam by his mother, and his mother complains of some symptoms the boy is experiencing. She says that he appears drowsy, sickly, and has increased urination and thirst. And then we're given the results from a glucose load test, and that will help us determine if this is diabetes. So real quick, a glucose load test helps us to determine if a patient has diabetes. And the patient is given a loading dose of glucose, and then serum blood levels are drawn at baseline at 1 hour, 2 hours, and 3 hours, and we're assessing the patient's insulin levels and their blood glucose levels to see if there's an appropriate response to the glucose load. So in this case, this patient's serum insulin levels, we're not given the glucose levels, we're just given the serum insulin levels. And this patient's has 0.8 level of insulin at baseline, and normal control is 6 plus or minus 2. So already at baseline, this person has decreased insulin levels. And then 1 hour after the patient is given the glucose, we see that the insulin level, serum insulin level is 5, and normal is 40 plus or minus 11. So that already, right off the bat, to me, is suggesting that this is type 1 diabetes. And I'll explain why I think it's type 1 versus type 2 from the limited analysis and assessment that we're given. So with type 1 diabetes, you have damage to the pancreatic beta cells, and these cells are unable to produce insulin. So this is, type 1 is insulin-dependent diabetes. And then, so like even at baseline, this patient, he's not even producing the insulin that he needs in response to glucose. And then with type 2 diabetes, it's also known as insulin-resistant diabetes mellitus, because the patient, their beta cells secrete insulin. However, the body, usually with obesity, is resistant to the insulin. So this person, if this was type 2 diabetes, we would see increased levels of insulin compared to a baseline, because the body is trying to make up for the insulin resistance, so it produces increased levels of insulin. So this leads me to believe this is type 1 diabetes. And then one of the questions here, what would you predict the patient's fasted blood glucose levels to be given his current conditions? So since this patient has not even less than normal levels of insulin at baseline, that would mean that the patient would have higher than normal levels of glucose in the blood just at baseline. And then 2 regulatory enzymes that are likely to be active in this individual's current state. So this patient is hyperglycemic, and I'm guessing they're not secreting enough insulin, so their body is in a low energy state. It's going to activate, since insulin's not working, it's low energy state, it's going to activate glucagon and epinephrine. And with glucagon and epinephrine, you're going to have gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, trying to produce energy sources for the body. So with glycogen breakdown here, we have glycogen breakdown. We're going to break down glycogen from skeletal muscle and the liver to produce this fuel source for the body. So glycogen, the regulatory enzyme that I chose is glycogen phosphorylase. Glycogen phosphorylase is going to break down glycogen to glucose 1-phosphate. And then phosphoglucomutase is going to break down glucose 1-phosphate to glucose 6-phosphate, and this can be utilized in glycolysis. And then in gluconeogenesis, again, I'm trying to make glucose out of pyruvate. Here I chose pyruvate carboxylase as my regulatory enzymes. It's going to be, again, low energy state, increased levels of AMP, increased levels of acetyl-CoA. It's going to activate this. So you're going to have the breakdown of pyruvate to oxaloacetate by pyruvate carboxylase, and then that's going to further go to phosphoenol pyruvate, and that's going to continue down the line to make glucose. And then we'll talk real quick about the symptoms that the mother said of increased thirst and increased urination. So usually the kidneys are able, at normal glucose levels in the blood, the kidneys are able to actively reabsorb glucose, and they're able to reabsorb it at 2 millimoles per minute. But when the renal threshold limit is exceeded, the kidneys are unable to filter the glucose, and so it's going to spill out into the urine because the kidneys are unable to reabsorb it. So as it spills out into the urine, it's actually also an osmotic diuretic, and this is going to, anywhere the glucose goes, the water volume is going to follow, so you're going to have increased urination. This is going to lead to dehydration and activate your thirst mechanism, so you're going to see increased thirst. Okay. And then with case 4 here, we're told that we have a 2-month-old, so this is female, this is pretty much an infant, and she's presenting with jittery spells several hours after breastfeeding. Her mother reports she has not given the baby anything to eat other than breast milk since birth, and the baby has only so the patient's only getting milk, and the baby has only recently been sleeping for more than 2 hours between feedings, and that's when the mother reports these symptoms started. So that right here is cluing us in that this baby cannot maintain a fasted state. And the laboratory results are consistent with hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, but they're otherwise unremarkable. And they try administering epinephrine. This also gives us a hint as to what this is. And there's no increase in blood glucose. However, there is an increase in blood lactate. And on physical examination, we find out that the baby has an enlarged liver. Liver's edge 4 centimeters below the right costal margin. Okay, so hepatomegaly, enlarged liver. So and then also blood glucose levels increase after breastfeeding, but she cannot maintain blood glucose levels within a normal range during fasting. Again, this is going to clue us into what this is. So based on the above information, which of the following is the most likely diagnosis of this patient? So we'll talk about hereditary fructose intolerance, galactosemia, and glycogen storage disease, which is the inability to use glycogen, and then glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. And the first 3, hereditary fructose intolerance, galactosemia, and glycogen storage disease, are all similar in that you're going to have kind of the same symptoms: increased liver, a lot of them hypoglycemia, but some of these clues kind of tell us that this is glycogen storage disease. So first we'll go over hereditary fructose intolerance, which is also usually caught in infants. So here, the fructose pathway, we have fructose, which is broken down to fructose 1-phosphate by fructokinase, that enzyme. And then fructose 1-phosphate is broken down into dihydroxyacetone phosphate and glycerolaldehyde by aldolase B. And with fructose, with hereditary fructose intolerance, it's with aldolase B enzyme. And when patients don't have that enzyme, aldolase B, we're going to have a buildup of fructose 1-phosphate. And this is going to lead to all kinds of terrible symptoms. Also, infants show signs of failure to thrive, vomiting, abdominal distension, jaundice, and liver failure, and also hypoglycemia. So these are kind of similar to the symptoms that we were presented with here. And hereditary fructose intolerance is also linked to glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis, and lipid metabolism, which causes wider consequences on metabolism beyond the liver. Okay, so that's our first one. And the next one is galactosemia. And this one is caused by an enzyme deficiency in the galactose pathway. We have here the galactose pathway. So it's with this enzyme, galactose 1-phosphate uridyl transferase. So galactose is usually broken down from galactose, which is part of milk, lactose. It's broken down to galactose 1-phosphate by galactokinase. And then from there, galactose 1-phosphate is broken down to glucose 1-phosphate, broken down pretty much into glucose. And the problem here is with this enzyme, galactose 1-phosphate uridyl transferase. So you're going to have a buildup of galactose 1-phosphate in this situation. And that's going to deplete the liver of its inorganic phosphate, which is going to cause liver failure. This could be fatal in a newborn, as the treatment is dietary restriction of lactose, and this patient's been getting lactose. And the main presentation symptoms of galactosemia include poor feeding, poor growth, liver enlargement, and dysfunction. Again, similar symptoms to what we're seeing here in our case study. And then our next one here, we have glycogen storage disease. And this is the inability to use glycogen. And the baby's symptoms in this match the description of glycogen storage disease. So this is what really clued us in, is the baby's conditions always worsen during a fasted state and resulting in hypoglycemia. And so glycogen storage disease type 1 is caused by the buildup of glycogen, which is going to lead to impaired organ function. It is caused by defects in glucose 6 phosphatase. So as you can see here, this is the final step in gluconeogenesis. Glucose 6 phosphatase, the opposite of glucokinase or hexokinase, is utilized to break down glucose 6 phosphate, the last step, to glucose. So if we're unable to do this, we're just going to be stuck with glucose 6 phosphate. We're not going to be able to make that glucose. So gluconeogenesis, we're unable to produce that source of glucose, which is a huge source of glucose in a fasted state. And also, epinephrine, think about this, epinephrine usually activates gluconeogenesis. So this person was given epinephrine, which should have activated gluconeogenesis, but this person's unable to break down the glucose 6 phosphate to glucose because their glucose 6 phosphatase is not working correctly. So that and then instead there's a buildup of lactate instead of increasing glucose levels. That tells us that this is a problem with gluconeogenesis because glucose 6 phosphatase is not working correctly. And so again, also the buildup of glycogen is going to lead to problems with the liver, kidney, and intestine, which is going to lead to complications to include hepatomegaly, nephromegaly, hypoglycemia, hyperlipidemia, hyperuricemia, lactic acidemia, and growth retardation. These, again, are all the symptoms that we are giving on presentation with this baby. So this tells us that this is glycogen storage disease versus this galactose pathway or fructose pathway, although very bad. Glucose 6 phosphatase, this is what we're dealing with here. And then lastly, the last thing that we were given is glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, and it is not this one. So if we can remember, this is glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Glucose 6 phosphate is used in the pentose phosphate pathway, and although this leads to hemolytic anemia, this would not cause all of the symptoms that we were given. So the pentose phosphate pathway, if you remember, is responsible for the conversion of utilization of glucose, fructose, and galactose. It's converted to glucose in the liver. And this pathway is important for the formation of NADPH. It's the main source of NADPH, and maintaining reduced glutathione for antioxidant activity, synthesis of ribose for nucleotide nucleic acid formation. And this is the first enzyme necessary in the pentose phosphate pathway, so we're not going to be able to utilize the pentose phosphate pathway, which really is going to lead to acute hemolysis of red blood cells, resulting in hemolytic anemia. But this is why, so this one was glycogen storage disease was the answer to this one. All right, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.